what's up, Spartan Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation Podcast. Here with your host, Matt Lonsberry. Just me tonight. As you know, Aiden usually joins me for podcasts, but he's got a busy schedule with coaching and being a student at Michigan State. So just me tonight. So that's why I need your help to continue the discussion about Mel Tucker being fired today by Michigan State. Just wanted to hop on and maybe clear up any questions as far as why this happened today, as opposed to after the hearing is set to conclude on October 5th and 6th. So yeah, I'll answer as many questions as I can going forward. Won't be able to answer everything, and you'll have to bear with me a little bit because obviously on my own tonight. So just go ahead and submit some questions to the comment section, and I will answer those as best I can. We've got one here from D Guard. His question is Mark D'Antonio going to step in and help instead of looking pretty on the sidelines? Who's going to transfer out? Is Indiana, Rutgers, Minnesota, Nebraska still beatable? I'm going to ignore that first part of the question. Obviously, Mark D'Antonio is here to be an advisor. This is not his coaching staff. He's here to help a friend in Harlan Barnett, and that's what he's here for. So who's going to transfer out? That's a good question. When Tucker is officially fired, which, I mean, he is officially fired today, but it's just he has 7 days to reply and try to legally question the for cause portion of the termination of his contract, so he can try to maybe negotiate a little bit. But it doesn't sound like Michigan State is going to play ball with that. They're doing their utmost here to not pay Mel Tucker another dime, and we'll have to see how that plays out. But the transfer portal will open for 30 days when Tucker is officially. I mean, I'm not sure if that's today or later, but 30 days the window will be open for players to transfer out, and anybody on the current roster will be able to at that time. So you're probably going to see several. I would imagine you're going to see a few guys enter the portal. Not sure how many, not sure who. We'll find that out as the names appear. And I'll run through those listed teams there. Indiana's pretty bad. I think I do think they're beatable. I think all of these teams are beatable. I think Michigan State can beat all these teams. I don't know that they will. Indiana is on the road. Minnesota's on the road. Rutgers and Nebraska, I believe, are both at home. So wouldn't be surprised if Michigan State wins all of these games. Maybe a little surprised if they win all of them. The Minnesota one stands out the most, I guess. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see them drop 3 out of 4 either. So we'll just have to see going forward. Thanks for the question. Like I said, you'll have to bear with me a little bit because I'm going to go through the comment section. All right, what are my thoughts on Pat Narduzzi as head coach? I think this ship kind of sailed during the last coaching hire in 2020. I know Pat Narduzzi was on the short list of candidates when Mark D'Antonio retired, and he kind of sent out that tweet about, I think it was like a Wolf of Wall Street reference about staying at Pitt, and I think he really rubbed a lot of Michigan State fans the wrong way with some of his comments about the 2021 Peach Bowl. I think he said that if Kenny Pickett played, Pitt would have beaten Michigan State no problem. Which the irony of that was Kenneth Walker III did not play either. So, yeah, I don't think there's too much of a interest from at least Michigan State's fan base in Pat Narduzzi, and I don't know how much interest he has in leaving Pitt for Michigan State either. And he's been pretty middle of the road at Pittsburgh as well. So again, that's not sure how much interest is there. Let's see what else we got here. Kyle asks, are conspiratorial questions allowed? Depends on what the conspiracy is. I'm not usually a conspiracy theorist guy, so It'll have to be somewhat in the realms of reality for me to answer those questions. Keys to Wisdom asks, do you think he will get the headset eventually? Talking about Mark D'Antonio. Original reports said he would. Week 1 he didn't. Well, the original reports were because Alan Haller himself, the athletic director, said he would be on the headset. The decision was made later that he would not be one of the 10 on-field coaches for Michigan State and that he would just serve an advisor role. So I don't think so. I don't think Mark D'Antonio is going to be on the headset at any time this year. I could be wrong, but at this point I would call that doubtful. Yes, as Kyle points out, he has 7 days to respond to being fired for cause, but one way or the other, he's done at Michigan State. He's not going to coach again at Michigan State. So I feel comfortable using the word fired because that's essentially what has happened today. Angie asked about the accuser having similar problem at MSD before. I don't know about similar problem. I know there's a little bit of scuttlebutt. And when I say scuttlebutt, I mean like not verified information. Her having an issue with Michigan State because of the whole Larry Nassar thing and how the university handled that whole process, which I'm not getting into that tonight at all. These are 2 very separate issues, and there's no reason to hash that out. But I know there's been a little bit of scuttlebutt about that. I don't know how much stock I put into it as far as having a vendetta. I'm not going to go down that road just because I don't have any information on that, and I don't want to speculate. Illust Eggplant says both coordinators need to go. That's semi-related since Mel Tucker is the guy who hired Scotty Hazelton and Jay Johnson, and they're getting dragged pretty good over the last 48 hours after the performance against Washington. I don't blame the fan base for that. Let's see what else we got in here. Matt A suggests Urban Meyer. There's been a little bit of that floating around. I don't know if that's the guy. I mean, obviously Urban Meyer's a proven winner, but when you have just gone through a scandal that has ended up getting your coach fired, I'm not sure Urban Meyer is the guy you want to bring in just because of his track record in those type of deals. So JR Jr. Says Mike Tressel, former defensive coordinator. I think he's the D coordinator at Wisconsin right now under Luke Fickell. Sure, there's probably some split feelings about that. Let's see. Any good prospects for head coach right now? I'll give you a few names that I think the 2 that I would point to right now as realistic and also good hires would be Mike Elko at Duke and Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. Elko, I wrote a piece about this. It's on our website, our Facebook page. But Elko is in his 2nd year at Duke right now. He's been a defensive coordinator for a long time before then. And I think he went 9-4 in his first season at Duke last year. And they're off to a 3-0 start this year. They beat Clemson in week 1. Obviously a defensive guy being a former coordinator, but he's put out some really good defenses. So that would be a name that I would throw out as a target. And Chris Kleiman is a guy who spent a lot of years in the lower levels of college football, like at North Dakota State. But he got promoted to, I'm not sure if he was the defensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator at North Dakota State, but he got promoted to the head coach and went on to reel off, I think, 4 national championships at North Dakota State, the FCS level. And then Kansas State hires him. And if you throw out the COVID year, I think they went 4-5 in the COVID year, but in his other 4 seasons at Kansas State, they've had a winning record every year. And Kansas State won the Big 12 championship last year. So he's a proven winner. He knows how to build a program. And I honestly think that Michigan State needs a guy who has head coach experience. That's my personal opinion, because it's just the program is going to be in a tough spot after this, because with the transfer portal, who knows how many guys are going to hang around. Mel Tucker and his staff brought in some talent, but all of that talent could potentially walk out the door and try to play somewhere else. So you're pretty much going to start from the ground up here. And so I think you need a guy who has had coaching experience, who knows how to build a program. That's the route that I would go if I was doing the search. And those would be the first two names on my list, would be Mike Elko and Chris Kleiman. Let me see here. Do you think Michigan State will swing for a big name coach known for winning, or will they play it safe with a low-key good guy? I think you can split the difference here. I think you can find a guy who is again, a proven program builder. That would be Chris Kleiman. And it also doesn't have any kind of skeletons in the closet. I think that's ideally what you're going to look for is somebody who does that. There's a few different guys out there outside of Kleiman and Elko. Keys to Wisdom mentions PJ Fleck. I'm sure that's a name that, again, Michigan State's fan base is probably split on a little bit. He had a lot of success, obviously, at Western Michigan. He's done a pretty good job at Minnesota, but Minnesota does play in the Big Ten West, and so there's that whole question of how competitive would Minnesota be if they were in the East as opposed to the West. Now, obviously, the East is tougher. So, but I do think PJ is a good coach. So that's a name that I've been kind of kicking around in my head too before today's news was PJ. But I'm not sure how the Michigan State fan base as a whole feels about that. Kelly asks, how soon will a new coach be hired? That's a good question too. Obviously, you're not going to bring in anybody to coach this year's team, but you could have the next hire in place. Probably, I would imagine it's probably going to be announced after the regular season. I don't think you would announce it during mid-season. Number one, you're probably going after somebody who's coaching somewhere else right now. If you're bringing in somebody with a head coach experience. So probably before bowl games would be my guess, with the new recruiting deadline, or not deadline, but the signing day. There's a signing day in December now. And so these decisions do tend to be made earlier in the year, as opposed to when National Signing Day was in February. So that would be my guess, is between the end of the regular season and before like the bowls start kicking off. Michael asked if Harlan Burnett has the authority to fire Hazelton or Johnson. I'm not sure, but given the fact that your head coach did just get fired and we're 3 weeks into the season, I wouldn't get your hopes up that Hazelton or Johnson will be fired anytime soon. And if I was a betting man, which I'm not, but I don't think they'll be fired at all this season, just because you're already down your head coach. And you need to stabilize as much as possible. A lot of these assistant coaches will probably not be here when the next regime comes in. So you're probably going to just let the season play out with the coaches you've got, do the best you can, try to make a bowl, and go forward from there. So I would not expect Hazelton or Johnson to be fired in season. Stephen asked about Washington's head coach, Kalen DeBoer, or Oregon State's head coach, younger and more offensive-minded. As far as Kalen DeBoer, frankly, I think he's in a better spot with Washington right now than where Michigan State's at as a program. I think that's a lateral move at best. Washington's joining the Big Ten, so they're going to have access to that TV revenue. So I just don't see the incentive for him to leave Washington for Michigan State. As far as Oregon State's head coach, that's Jonathan Smith. I think he's a good candidate as well. He would also be on my list. The hang up, if there's one, is that he's an Oregon State alum. He played there. So, there's the whole heartstrings thing. I don't know if he'll leave his alma mater. They're in good shape right now. They're ranked, I think, top 15 in the country. Good team. Seems like a good coach. And Oregon State's not in the situation that Washington is. They're kind of floating out there as the Pac-12 dissolves. So they don't have access to the same kind of funds. So maybe you can entice Jonathan Smith to leave Oregon State for Michigan State if you can offer him a big contract, because Oregon State's not going to be able to match that because they're kind of floating out there right now. So I do think Jonathan Smith is an option. Scrolling through questions here. Kyle asked about Dan Mullen. That's interesting. That's not a name that has occurred to me during this time, but he is a guy with a lot of experience. I know when he left Mississippi State for Florida, the criticism about Dan Mullen was he didn't really have an itch for recruiting, not big into recruiting. So that's obviously tough when you have to compete against Ohio State, Michigan, USC going forward, Oregon. So that's a concern. But at the same time, while he was at Mississippi State, he had some good teams, and they pulled off some upsets of some of the big SEC schools with lesser talent than you've got at Alabama or Georgia or LSU. So that's an interesting name. I don't think I'd be opposed to that or would call that a bad hire. Wouldn't be at the top of my list, but not a bad name. I think Kelly asked about Colorado. I think they are very happy with Deion Sanders. That's all I'll say about that. Brian Hartline's another name that's kind of come out recently, really since the Tucker news broke. I think Brian Hartline is an excellent recruiter. He obviously knows the Midwest and knows the Big Ten, being a former Buckeye player. He just got promoted to OC at Ohio State. I'm not sure if he's calling plays or if it's still Ryan Day. I haven't watched a whole lot of Ohio State, to be honest, this year yet. But my concern with Brian Hartline is just the fact that he hasn't been a head coach. And as I said, I think this is a situation where you got to build from the ground up. So that would be my concern with Brian. Would be, obviously he's had some good mentors with Urban Meyer, coaching mentors with Urban Meyer and Ryan Day, but that would be my hang up with him. But I wouldn't hate the hire if they somehow land Brian Hartline. I would question if he would be willing to come from Columbus to East Lansing too. But if they landed him, I certainly wouldn't shoot it down right away. I would be intrigued, but my concern would be he hasn't been a head coach. Eggplant asked about the transfer rules. So the portal will open for 30 days, but if you've already transferred, you'll have to sit out if you choose to transfer again. So that means guys like Tanis Adele would have to file a waiver if he transferred from Michigan State, because he came from Texas A&M. So this would be his second transfer. And so you'd have to file for a waiver. And as we saw with the North Carolina kid, I think his name was Tez Walker, second transfer when he ended up at North Carolina, he applied repeatedly for waivers, and the NCAA shot those down every time. So you're running the risk of having to sit out a year if you've already transferred to Michigan State and choose to transfer again. This is guys that have not graduated. I believe graduate transfers can go ahead and transfer and not have to sit out if you've graduated from the institution that you're leaving. So that wouldn't apply there, but there's a few guys. Nathan Carter would be another one. Again, I'm just throwing these out as examples. I'm not saying that they will transfer, but he transferred in from Connecticut. So if he chose to leave, you run the risk of having to sit out a year if you haven't graduated. Nicholas asked about Cliff Kingsbury, another guy who's been a head coach, obviously known for his offensive schemes and things like that. My concern would be he wasn't great at Texas Tech. So not sure what the appeal would be there. He's a younger guy. What kind of staff could he assemble? I think that would be a big question. He'd have to bring in somebody to run the defense. So not sure about him. There is some Sharon Moore talk out there, the offensive coordinator / O-line coach from Michigan. I think he's a good recruiter. I think he's a good position coach for Michigan. But again, the no head coaching experience thing. So that's would be my hang up with Sharon Moore. And as JR Jr. says, obviously there's the whole Michigan State thing. So would Spartan fans be willing to give a Michigan staffer a shot? Count Jr. as one who says no. Best asking about Harlan Barnett looking shell-shocked on Saturday. I think he was, I don't, just want to make sure I say this the right way. I don't disagree with you, Beth. I think he was taken back a little bit. Obviously, this is new for Harlan too. And he mentioned it, he's not used to having to do a press conference after a game. That's new to him. Obviously, Washington took it to Michigan State pretty good on Saturday. So I think there was a little bit of an embarrassment. And I mean, think about it. If, Harlan has said on Tuesday that his kind of dream job was Michigan State. And then in the first game as that head coach, your team gives up 713 yards, school record. That was obviously disappointing for him. I definitely had some empathy for him and sympathy for him. I think he's an excellent human being. I think he's a good guy. Not sure. I don't want to talk about like the whole head coaching thing because I highly doubt he is going to be the guy. I could be wrong, but I highly doubt at this point. And I think he's a good dude. So I'm not going to, sit here and trash him. So, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing either. Let's see what else we got. Greg asks about the quarterback situation. Will Hauser start at quarterback and should he? I think it's good that you distinguish the two things. I don't think he will. Unless Noah is injured, I don't think Caden Hauser will get the start on Saturday against Maryland. Should he is open to debate. I feel like there's a little bit of, Caden did lead the whole 99-yard touchdown drive at the end of the game. We saw Noah do that a lot last year, or not a lot, but at times last year when at the end of games he would come in and perform really well. And there's some clamoring for make a quarterback change. So it's hard to know how much stock to put into that last drive. But I will say, Caden did look pretty good, and I think he was 2 for 4, and both incompletions were dropped passes. So I think that's encouraging that he did look good and got a bit of an opportunity. I think my answer would come down to the health of Noah Kim. I think if he's healthy, I would lean towards just letting him ride it out and seeing what else he's got against a team that's not as talented as Washington. I think Maryland is a decent team, but they're certainly not a top 10 team. So I would ride with Noah going into this game, and then you just observe and see what he looks like. But I think I'd have a little bit of a shorter hook. Also, I think I would not be afraid to go to Hauser if things aren't going well. Brian asks, has the administration come out with reasons for firing him now as opposed to July or as opposed to suspension last week? I can read you the letter, or at least parts of the letter, which is part of the reason why I wanted to come on and do this, is because I figured there'd be questions like this. You're going to have to bear with me a little bit because, again, I'm going to kind of read through this and give the reasons. And also some of these reasons are quote unquote not safe for work. So just be aware of that as I start to read you this. But the reasons provided for cause, and the university says Mel Tucker admitted this during the investigative process, and the stuff that he admitted to doing, they believe, is enough to fire him for cause. And so this is what they list. commenting to the vendor, which is Brenda Tracy, about her looks, body, and body parts, specifically her backside, except it's not backside. It's a 3-letter word. Just trying to keep this PG here. So they go on making flirtatious comments to the vendor in conversations that you state, quote, happened often. And then finally, masturbating and making sexually explicit comments about yourself and the vendor while on the phone with the vendor, which you describe as, quote, phone sex and, quote, a late night intimate conversation. And the university believes that that is enough to fire him for cause under the clause in his contract that states, there's a quote out there. I don't have the quote in front of me, but there's a clause in his contract that talks about moral turpitude or embarrassing the university and things like that. And so that's what they point to. They point to those 3 things and say that file that lands under that distinction of, moral turpitude and embarrassing the university. There was an interesting line in here from the letter that I thought it's right here. It says, at this point, the university has amassed a body of undisputed evidence of misconduct that warrants termination for cause. So undisputed evidence is what the university says they have. So they're very confident in what they've got to be able to fire him for cause. I hope that answers your question and several others about, why they have enough now as opposed to before. That's kind of the lowdown. Searching for some more questions here. Charles asked about Keon Coleman and Peyton Thorne. I don't think this had anything to do with them transferring. I don't think they knew about it. I think if the players were aware, there's probably some rumors and stuff, but they did not know specific facts. I don't think this had anything to do with them transferring. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, but I don't believe so. Scott asked about Urban Meyer as well. I don't know, this was a while ago, but I shared this before, but just to follow it up, I just don't think he's a guy you can bring in right now based on his past. Obviously a proven winner, 3-time national champion, has won everywhere he's gone. But number one, I don't think every report that I've seen says he doesn't have any interest in being a coach anymore. So that's the first hang up. The second hang up is he's got a lot of baggage at previous stops at Ohio State and Florida. So I just don't think it's realistic. Again, just searching for questions here in the comment section. Eggplant talks about, coordinators or current head coaches. Again, I think you need to bring in a head coach, a guy who has experience. I would not hire a coordinator if it was me. I think you need somebody who knows how to build a program up from the ground up. People will probably laugh at this because he hasn't had. It's been 3 games, but Matt Rule is I thought was a good hire by Nebraska because they needed somebody with a proven track record of building a program from the ground up. And yeah, they've lost 2 of their first 3, but that's not enough of a sample size to make a assessment of Matt Rule. But I think you need a guy who has head coaching experience. What's the mood on campus? How's the morale? I'm not a student, so and the only time I'm on campus is on game days or when I'm there for media availability. So I can't really answer this question. This would be a good question for Aiden. Maybe if I remember, I'll bring it up on Wednesday's podcast when we preview the Maryland game. But as I'm not on campus every day, I can't really speak to that, but I appreciate the question. Kyle asked, is a win against Maryland enough to spark the football team? Thoughts on Matt House, defensive coordinator from LSU? I think this is a big weekend for this year's team. I don't know how big it is, like grand scheme of things, because of the transfer portal and the ability of guys to just leave and all of the turnover that's going to happen on the coaching staff. But as far as like making a bowl game and this year's team, I think this is a huge week. And not to say that you have to win it in order to make a bowl game, but you've got to be competitive in this game, because you're already at 2 wins. You only need 4 more to get to bowl eligibility. Yeah, somebody earlier listed Indiana, Rutgers, Minnesota, Nebraska. I think those are all winnable. So, but if you go out there and you get smacked again, not even as bad as this last week, but if you get beat pretty good by Maryland, that's going to be another blow to the psyche of the team, to the confidence of the team. So you've got to put your best foot forward on Saturday and make this a competitive game at worst. Going forward, I think it's a big deal for this year's team. TJ Guard's looking for a prediction. Usually we do this on Wednesdays, and so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it tonight. But if you're, I always try to keep my predictions fair too. Like I'm not a water carrier for the program. My job is to observe and to be as objective as possible. So that's what I try to do. That's what I always strive to do. So just, FYI with that. I'm not going to give a score prediction right now, because I usually take a little bit of time to think about that before I do. But right now I'm definitely leaning towards Maryland winning the game. I don't know what else I can say at this point. Again, I haven't given it a ton of thought beyond that, because like I said, there's usually a structure to our weeks, and Wednesday we usually do predictions, but I would lean Maryland. It's Talia Tagovailoa is a good quarterback. They've got some decent athletes over there at Maryland. Mike Loxley has, I think Maryland has improved record-wise each year since he's been there. They had 8 wins last year. A solid team, like not a groundbreaking or a team that's going to compete for the college football playoff, but I think they're solid. And honestly, that's more than I can say for Michigan State right now, just because of, the foundation has just taken a huge hit with all this news. So I would lean Maryland at this point, but we'll see. We're going to hear from Harlan Barnett tomorrow. We'll see where his mindset is. We'll see what he says about the team. So that's where I'm at right now. Actually, I love this question by Eggplant, because I've really been thinking about this even as I was leaving the press box and going down to press conferences afterwards, where we heard from Harlan and Trey Mosley and JD Duplain. I don't think the outcome would have been very different with Mel Tucker on the sideline. Obviously, you would not have had the distraction that the players had this week, and all of the turmoil with the coaching staff being, shaken up, and Harlan, having to take head coach team duties. But based on the game plan that we saw from Jay Johnson and Scotty Hazelton, I just don't know how this outcome would have been much different. I mean, Michael Penix did whatever he wanted to on Saturday. I don't know what the defensive game plan was, but whatever they tried, and they tried a few different things, it did not work. I mean, you gave up a school record in yards. Offensively, Michigan State still can't run the football, which is, I'm sure, frustrating for fans, because, outside of Kenneth Walker, this team has not been able to run the football for, for the other 3 years that this coaching staff has been in place. So I don't think it would have looked much differently, to be honest with you. And I wrote this in my post-game piece about Harlan Barnett and the Michigan players not deserving to have to, stand up there and take questions. And they did a great job. But to me, one of the bigger travesties of this whole thing is that Mel Tucker doesn't have to answer for the outcome that we saw on Washington, because this is his coaching staff. These are his players. This is the way he assembled the team. And obviously in year 4, it's still woefully short of where the expectations were. So I hope that answers your question. Susan asked about Narduzzi as well. I shared this earlier. So if you want to rewind and find that, it was pretty early on when I started taking questions, so I'm not going to rehash it, but I did answer that earlier. David asks, why has the offensive line looked so bad? Coach Cap was supposed to be a highly respected coach. I brought this up in our last podcast. I think I agree that Kaplivich has been kind of devoid of criticism. Like when coaches have started to get criticized, he's usually not one who has gotten criticism. I think it's because he has recruited fairly well since he's been there. But I think anybody is open to criticism at this point, and it has been a long time that he's been in the program. And again, Michigan State still can't run the ball. So I think I have no issue at all with Chris Kaplivich being criticized at this point. I think it's fair. I think it's justified. I mean, how much more time do you need to get an offensive line that can get a little bit of push or consistent push? And it's been really bad. I think I shared this on Monday, but outside of the games that Kenneth Walker played, I think there's 23 games since Tucker was hired that Walker did not play, and Michigan State's averaging 104 yards rushing in those games, and that's not good. That's including probably some skewed numbers, because it takes into account the games against Central Michigan and Western Michigan and Richmond and Youngstown, or maybe not Youngstown, but like a few other small programs where they probably ran the ball pretty well against overmatched competition. And yet the average is still 104, which is just not good enough. Eggplant, I addressed Mike Elko earlier. I do think he'd be a good hire. The fact that he's only been a head coach for a year, and this will be like he's in his second year right now, that worries me a little bit. But he was a coordinator for a really long time before this, and the early returns at Duke have been really good. I think he's 12-4 so far at Duke. 9-4 last year, 3-0 so far this year. They knocked off Clemson in week 1 and smacked Clemson pretty good, to be honest. I mean, Clemson's only score was off of a muffed punt. So really good defensive coach. I think he'd be a good hire. My only hang up with Mike Elko is he's only been a coach for less than a year and a half, or head coach for less than a year and a half. So Philip's asking about Coach Ligma. I don't know who that is. You'll have to help me out a little bit more with that, because I'm not sure. My top 3: Mike Elko, Chris Kleiman, Kansas State, and PJ Fleck again jumped to my mind. Early on after this news about Tucker came out, and then the whole suspension thing. I'm not sure how much conviction I say when I say PJ Fleck. I'm not sure how much conviction is behind that, but as far as like my top 3, That would probably be it. There's probably another name that I'm just not thinking of right now who might be a better option than PJ Fleck, but off the top of my head, that's where I'm at. But it's Elko and Kleiman, separation, and then PJ. Keys to Wisdom points out that, yeah, there's no divisions after this year. I don't know what that means as far as Fleck being willing to leave Minnesota. Again, he's done a pretty good job there. The one thing about Minnesota is you don't have super high expectations from like the administration and like the athletic department. Like PJ's won probably an average of 8 games per year since he's been there, and he's beaten Wisconsin several times while he's been there. So that's, I mean, not to disparage Minnesota, but that's probably good enough at Minnesota. Like, I don't think Minnesota expects to compete for Big Ten championships. And, you know, after Mark D'Antonio's run in East Lansing, the expectation here is to compete for championships. Maybe not every year, but like every 4 to 5 years, I think you need to be, and at minimum every 4 to 5 years, you need to be in the race for a Big Ten championship. I think that's what the expectations are at Michigan State now after the Mark D'Antonio era. Let's see. What else do we got here? Rob asked about Mark Stoops. That's an interesting name. He has been a head coach for a while now. He's done a really, really good job at Kentucky. That's obviously a basketball school. But he's made that program really respectable. I'm not sure if you could lure him away from Kentucky, because Kentucky's backed by SEC money, so they can probably match any offer that Michigan State would make. And he's established at Kentucky, and so, you know, the wheels are already turning there. It's running like a well-oiled machine because he's been there for a long time. He's had quite a bit of success. I mean, based on Kentucky standards, he's had quite a bit of success there. So yeah, I think that'd be a great hire if you land Mark Stoops. I'm not sure how realistic it is. Eggplant asks, what do you see the program looking like over the next couple of years? This is an interesting question because my initial thought is, I think it's gonna be rough for a while. That's my initial immediate reaction. But in the transfer portal era, and we've seen this with Lincoln Riley at USC. We've seen it with Deion Sanders at Colorado. Now, obviously, that's a very unique situation because there's nobody like Deion. So you're not going to go hire the next Deion Sanders. You'd have to hire him, or you're not going to have anybody like him because there is nobody like Deion Sanders. So with the transfer portal, you can turn things around quickly. So that's certainly a possibility if you knock the hire out of the park and the guy comes in with a good plan and is a good recruiter and can bring some guys in from the transfer portal. I know there was some criticism of Mel Tucker about how much he was reliant on the transfer portal, so I'm not sure how that would play for Michigan State fans, but I think the possibility is there if you make the correct hire to get this turned around quickly. But it's hard to say until we know who the guy is going to be. So that's why I say my initial thought is it might be tough sledding here for a couple of years. Let's see here. David brings up some interesting things about Fleck. I've heard a little bit of this. I haven't looked into it much, and I don't know about the whole affair with the wife and top. I'm not sure about that, so I'm not going to speculate at all. If you want to Google it and go look it up, that's fine. but I don't want to like just bury it either. So I'll let you guys look into that, how you if you want to. Kyle asked about Garrett Riley. Again, another good offensive mind, but hasn't been a head coach. So that would be my hang up. And we'll see how it works out with, I mean, he just moved from TCU to Clemson, and Clemson, again, first game as OC, so not going to put a whole lot of stock into it, but Clemson really struggled against Duke in week 1 offensively. So, but I think Garrett Riley is a good offensive coordinator. Not sure if he's ready to be a head coach or not. What's the biggest change you think it needs to happen with the new coaching staff next year compared to other staffs? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by this question. You need some better game planners. I guess that would be the first thing that I point to, because again, outside of having a generational talent like Kenneth Walker, the coaching has been suspect at best over the last couple of years. So that would be, I think your head coach has to be a guy who's knows how to build a program, is a solid recruiter, solid to good recruiter. And then your coordinators need to be people who know their X's and O's and know how to game plan for opponents, because that's been severely lacking. As far as the PJ Fleck and the whole thing with Minnesota, I know there was a bit of after the news broke about Pat Fitzgerald with the hazing scandal at Northwestern. I have my own thoughts on that, but I'll keep them to myself. But, there was some former Minnesota players who brought up similar allegations about PJ and the Minnesota program. I don't put a whole lot of stock into what was said about PJ and the Minnesota program. I don't think I would put a whole lot of stock into it. But again, that's something, if you want to read about, you can go ahead and Google it. But me personally, I don't put a ton of stock into it. Jim asks, do you need to consider Midwest connections for recruiting? Has the portal NIL made it not relevant? That's a good question. I think it certainly doesn't hurt to have connections in the Midwest, most notably Ohio, because Ohio is where the majority of the Midwest talent lies. So I think Ohio connections would be a good thing, but that's something that can be filled with somebody, and like an assistant coach too, like an assistant coach who has good ties to Ohio, then can be your area recruiter there. Doesn't have to be the head coach, is I guess the point I'm trying to make. But with the portal and with NIL, it's probably not as relevant as it used to be. But that's a good question. I think you're certainly going to want to have somebody on staff who has Midwest connections and can be that area recruiter for Ohio and some other close regions. Any updates on Berger Mangum? All this preseason hype on Mangum. What's going on with him? Hopper, yeah. So tight end Tyneil Hopper was taken off the field on the cart Saturday against Washington. It was towards the end of the game. I think I was on Michigan State's scoring drive, and he put out pictures on Twitter with his leg immobilized at the hospital. So certainly looks like he's going to be out for significant time, if not the entire season. I don't have specific updates about Berger or Mangum. They don't really tell us those things, and even if they did, I probably would be limited in what I could share and still have any kind of access. So I don't have specific updates. The Mangum one surprises me a little bit more than Berger, just because I think he was questionable the first week against Central Michigan in the availability report that the Big Ten puts out every week now. think he was questionable, and then the next week he was downgraded to out, and then he was still out. So that sounds to me like regression and not progress, which is interesting and discouraging, to be frank. As far as Berger, obviously he did not dress on Saturday. He was banged up in, I want to say, the second quarter against Richmond. This is just purely gut feeling, but my gut feeling would be I wouldn't expect to see Berger anytime soon, as far as like this Saturday. I guess I would just say that I wouldn't. And again, just gut feeling, not based on anything information wise. Wouldn't expect to see Berger on Saturday. Not sure about Mangum. Not sure what's going on with him. Michael asks if Mark D'Antonio gets the job again. I don't think that's an option. I don't think he wants to be a head coach again. I think has enjoyed retirement, and I don't think it would be beneficial for him. I don't think it would be beneficial for the program. I think it's best to let his era be his era and celebrate it for what it was. And I don't think that's an option. Or I didn't realize we're almost at an hour. I'll take a couple more and then I'm probably going to get out of here, guys. But I do appreciate all of the questions and the interaction. Appreciate you guys joining us, but I will look for a few more here. Michael asked about Bill O'Brien. I think it depends on who you ask. I know a lot of Alabama fans were not pleased with him as their offensive coordinator. I think O'Brien was Penn State's first coach after the Jerry Sandusky scandal. And he kind of led Penn State through those years where they were under sanctions from the NCAA and things like that. And I think he did a good job in that situation, given the sanctions that were on Penn State and whatnot. But I mean, he's the OC with the Patriots, I believe. I'm not sure if he's looking to get back into college football. Wouldn't be very high on my list. Kelly Sweet says Kirk Cousins as the coach after he retires. I'm sure she's joking about that, but I'm sure he would be very much loved by. I mean, he's very loved by Michigan State's fan base. Not sure if Kirk wants to be a coach or not, but that would be I'd be interesting that'd be a fun conversation to have with him about just coaching in general, like if he wants to be one. Any former NFL coaches that could be considered for the head coaching job? I don't watch as much NFL as I do college, so it's a tough answer for me, or a tough question for me to answer. And coaching in the NFL is so much different than it is in college football these days, because you don't have to recruit, you don't have to deal with the transfer portal, you don't have to deal with donors, you don't have to deal with boosters. I mean, it's kind of the same thing there, but in the NFL, you just coach football, and that's what you do. You've got a GM to handle contract stuff. You've got your owner to pay guys, but you're just coaching football. And in college, you've got to be the CEO of the program. You've got to coach. You've got to do media availabilities. You got to go to events, and you got to talk to donors, and you've got to try to raise funds for NIL. It's just a really involved job. And so I'm not sure a guy who hasn't been a head coach in college, who has in NFL and in the NFL, I don't know if there would be much interest, because just all the other, for lack of a better term, headaches that you have to deal with in college. Kyle, no, Mel Tucker's not going to coach another day in East Lansing, period. End of story. Lane Kiffin. Again, I don't know what Lane Kiffin's incentive would be to leave Ole Miss and come to Michigan State. I think, again, that's probably a lateral move at best. He already has, or Ole Miss has SEC money, so they can probably match any offer that Michigan State were to make. And this is based on what I've seen from other college football podcasters and things like that. But I think Lane Kiffin ultimately wants to be the next head coach at Alabama after Nick Saban retires. So I think that's where his mind is at. So that's my thoughts on Lane Kiffin. I think he wants to be at Alabama. Any good coaches in the MAC or lower level leagues? Again, this is a little bit outside. As much as I love college football, and I do, because I cover one specific team, I can't watch nearly as much as I wish I could, or nearly as much as I used to. Like when I was in college, I watched college football all day long on Saturdays, and I just can't do that anymore because I'm covering a specific program. So not sure about specific names. I know Jason Candle is the coach at Toledo. He's been there for 9 years. In the article I threw up earlier today about, betting odds, as far as the next head coach at Michigan State, he was listed. I think the fan base would be underwhelmed by hiring him, though. So I'm not sure how that would fly. Not that you're not hiring a coach based on who the fan base thinks is going to be good. Like that's not what I'm trying to say. I just don't think that would be received very well. I think I wrote the story earlier. I think he's 56-33 in 9 years at Toledo. He's won the MAC twice. So again, not sure if he would be a good enough flash hire. I mean, every year there are a group of 5 coaches though who get an opportunity and excel. Kalen DeBoer was that guy not that long ago. I think he was at, I want to say Fresno State. I could be wrong on that, but I think he was at Fresno State before Washington, and obviously he's an outstanding coach. So, there's certainly guys out there. I don't know names. I just know programs, but whoever coaches at Troy, I would, put some feelers out there because Troy's been pretty good. The coach at Coastal Carolina, if he's still around, if it's still the same guy who's kind of led them to being a good program over the last 3 to 4 years, if he's still there, I would look at him. Hugh Freeze was at Liberty. Now he's at Auburn. And so, Liberty is still good, but it's not Hugh Freeze anymore who's there. I know it's probably one of his coordinators, or I could be wrong about that too. But so I would be hesitant about Liberty. But Troy, I know, has been good. South Alabama, there's a program. They just beat the crap out of Oklahoma State. I think they beat them 33-7. That's been a small program that's been on the rise. So whoever's coaching at South Alabama, I don't have the names in front of me, but there's an option there. Hope that answers your question. Cameron points out Mike Elko, the coach at Duke, and the offensive coordinator at Colorado. Is that Sean Lewis, or is he the defensive coordinator? He was the head coach at Kent State and then went to Colorado. I think he's the offensive coordinator, but he might be the defensive coordinator off the top of my head. I'm not sure, but yeah, that'd be an option. Again, he checks the box as far as having head coach experience. Obviously there was something attractive about him because Dion went out and hired him. So I think that's an interesting proposition. Michael asked about a possible NCAA getting involved. I don't think so. I think this is an internal matter for Michigan State. I don't think, unlike previous scandals like the one at Penn State with Jerry Sandusky,
and some others where the NCAA got involved. I don't like, there's not criminal activity here. Like I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not sure where the whole sexual harassment thing falls into that. But like, because there's not a crime involved, I don't think the NCAA has any reason to get involved here. So, and no, I don't think there'll be sanctions. Tony Anise from Ferris. That's a big jump to go from Division II. I think Ferris is Division. Yeah, Ferris is Division II. That's a huge jump to go from Division II all the way to a Power 5 Big Ten program. That's a huge jump. So don't expect that. No. A few more comments about Tressel. We talked about him a little bit earlier. D'Antonio guy, but I don't think he has head coaching experience. Though again, I'm kind of repeating myself at this point. But Kellen Moore, same thing. Hasn't been a head coach. I think you need a program builder. All right. I think with that, we're getting some of the same questions we've gotten before. We've gone an hour, so I think I'm going to call it a night. But again, appreciate you guys asking some questions. Hopefully, was able to answer those to the best of my ability and gave some clarity. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you on Wednesday, where we'll have more about Michigan State's upcoming game against Maryland. So appreciate it. Thanks, guys.